Good evening, or morning, or whatever time of day it is for you. I am Celestia, and this is a world building workshop called A Window into Worlds. This is going to be the first session of probably four, and it will be recorded and put on YouTube later as soon as I figure out how to do that. And I'm glad that you can make it, or that you could watch the video later when it's available. Today is going to be a very general thing. We're going to be going over blanketed statements and a little bit of details, but what you can expect from this workshop is going to be completely focused on world building. I'm not going to give you a lot of writing advice. It is aimed sort of at dungeon masters and role players as well, so I'll be mentioning those as well. And I have on here 3 to 4 episodes. It will probably be 4 because this is an enormous undertaking, depending on how much room you have to work with. So I encourage you to get involved, to ask questions that are relevant to what we're talking about at the time. Before we start, I just want to get this out firstly. Thank you to RPHQ, Roleplay Headquarters, for supporting and hosting this workshop. If you are not a member of RPHQ, but you're interested in roleplay and MMOs, and tabletop games, pen and paper, if you like D&D, you need to visit rphq.org. I do know that they're having some site problems right now, but it'll be resolved. There's an engine forums that you can get involved in, and they constantly have networking, and they are looking for DMs. So if you are interested in DMing, doesn't matter what tabletop game, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or World of Darkness, you should definitely get on there, let people know. You can probably go towards Malfunction, who is desperately looking for DMs. Secondly, if you're here as a writer and you are not in a writing group, whether it's local or it's online, I encourage you to find one. You can use Facebook, or you can go to meetup.com and you can find one that is close to you, or start one of your own. There are always people in your area that are looking for writing groups. Having other people with you and encouraging you is the best thing that you can possibly do. Ever since I joined my writing group, it has opened up an entire world to me. They've published 2 anthology books on their own. I was in one of them. It was a great experience. It's an excellent learning experience. It's intimidating. It's really intimidating, and there's a lot of deadlines, but it's great. I really think that everyone would benefit, whether you're a published author, whether you're just starting out, or whether you've never done any writing before. It doesn't matter. We have people in my writing group who have agents. We have people who have published several books, and we all work together and support each other. Now, on to the fun stuff. So what is world building? When we talk about world building, a lot of things come to mind. It's going to be big scale things like Tolkien's Middle Earth. Everybody knows what Lord of the Rings is. If you don't know what Lord of the Rings is, you've probably been living under a rock for like 100 years. So everyone knows it. It's a great big world. There's different languages, there's different races. It's the sort of thing that everything else is based off of. All of those monsters and creatures that we saw then have reappeared over and over again. On a small scale, it's also possible to do, and a lot of people only focus on that. High Rise by J.G. Ballard is a book that was recently made into a movie. I saw the cast for the movie, which is outstanding actors, and thought I would really like to read this book to know what I'm getting into. I have yet to watch the movie, because the book, I will caution you, is pretty serious. Basically, anything horrible that could happen in the world happens in this book. So if you're sensitive to animal murder, or rape, or incest, or pretty much anything horrible, murder, is a regular thing. It's in this book. So if that stuff bothers you, you probably shouldn't touch it. If it doesn't bother you, go nuts, because in retrospect, if it is an incredible example of small-scale world building, because it all happens in a single building. World building is a crazy daunting task. I've already said how big it is, how much it takes. It can get really overwhelming. It can be very discouraging. And you start asking yourself, am I even doing this right? This is something that you have free creative reign on. It's something that you really are going to put your soul into. Everything you're going to do is going to completely revolve around making this world of yours. And it's probably going to annoy your friends and your family because it's all you talk about. And at a certain point, they know how the story's going before you've even written it. So you start to ask questions like, what makes a world? Where do I even start? What do I need to worry about when I'm working on my book, or if you're working on a campaign for a Dungeons & Dragons or something, and you don't even have an idea? So let's ask a different question. Let's take this from a different approach. Let's ask the question, what is social studies? If you're in America, you've had a social studies course in a public school. A lot of people associate social studies with history, period. And they don't think of all the other things that go into it. But social studies is the study of the entire world, its physical form, the societies, how those societies interact, and how they impact the earth. This is the past, the present, the future. It's how people function. It's the economic system. It's the mountains to the lakes to the oceans. It's the governments. It's also history. And it's actually psychology too. And of course religious studies and sociology. It's everything about the world and how it works. So then, when you think about the elements of world building, wait a minute, that's the same list. Yes, that is exactly the same list, because that's all the stuff that you need to start addressing. World building is creating a world's physical form, the societies that occupy it, how they function and how they interact, and the impact they have on the earth, the past, the present, and the future. And I sound like a broken record. But that's exactly what you're going to be including in this. You have to address not just your story, but the world that it takes place in, because you want it to be a fleshed out world. You want it to be something that people can look at, feel like they're there, whether you're doing it as a book, or even think on the grander scale, if you're screenwriting or if you have a book that you're wanting to publish, it might be a TV show or a movie sometime. So you want it to be real. You want people to really feel like they're there. So who am I? You're probably sitting there thinking, what authority does this lady have? I'm just like you. I have a passion for this. I love writing fiction. I love building worlds. I've taught several world building workshops locally through my writing group. And I participate in National Novel Writing and Month and Camp NaNoWriMo every year. National Novel Writing Month, if you have never participated in it, is probably the craziest thing that you will do. The goal is to write 50,000 words in 1 month. It's about 1,667 words a day. That's very intimidating. But what I always recommend to people, don't start with National Novel Writing Month. It is incredibly intimidating, and if you fail, you get discouraged. But you shouldn't be that concerned with failing. A lot of people fail. I think I've managed the month, which is in November, once. I actually finished. But during Camp NaNoWriMo, you can actually set your own goals, as low as 10,000 words. And once you validate your 10,000 words or more, you have won. And that seems like a kind of a low achievement to some people, but it's a great feeling and it's a great step. The idea is to keep you writing all year long, and to encourage you and help you build up that writing stamina and endurance. One of the first camp nanos I did, I actually did the 50,000 words, and that was just a camp instead of the full novel writing month. So if you're interested in NaNoWriMo, I know it's got a really silly abbreviation, but you can go to nanowrimo.org or campnanowrimo.org, and the next Camp Nano is starting on July 1st. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, and I really encourage you to do it, and you'll see why. Projects, I have been working on a very large-scale fantasy series for the last several years. It has consumed so much of my life and my time and binders and sketch pads, and I just spend all my time thinking about it some days. As for credentials, I do have a bachelor's degree in social studies education with a minor in history. Almost had a double major, but I already had one degree that I wasn't able to use, so I decided not to get two. So hopefully I'm actually using those classes that I've had well and using them for world building instead of teaching social studies. If anyone has any questions, now's a good time before I start rambling on again. And if you have some later, feel free to jump in. Now that I don't have to look at a webcam, I'm doing much better at looking at the chat window on my left, though I did have some technical difficulties earlier and thought my laptop was going to explode. But it didn't. If you do have questions outside of this, you can email me or tweet at me on Twitter. And I am everywhere, Celestia. Pretty much. If it's a Celestia that looks kind of shady, that's probably not me, because other people have taken my name since the last 15 years. Now there's 3 different ways that you can start with world building. A lot of people start on the small scale. And when I say you're starting small, you have a specific city or location that you're building this story around. You've thought of something that sounds great. When I was little, I would always have these dreams of a city, which in my mind, it was my city. It was where I lived. But that city's nothing like where I live. It had a beach and a Chinese restaurant, and at the time we didn't have any of that, and we certainly don't have a beach where I live. But in my mind, it created this city, and later on I thought, well, what sort of world does that belong in? Because I've certainly never been there. So a lot of people will have little inklings of a city. They'll have these vague memories of a place they visited, and they want to write about it. So they start with the small, and they build out from there. The more common is to take your story. You have a story in mind. You have this story all planned out from beginning to end. You know who's going to act in it when it's a blockbuster, and you just need to build the world around it. Whether it's a fantasy, whether it's a sci-fi or paranormal, it doesn't matter. You're going to be looking at this story, and you need to build a world around it so that everything makes sense. The last one is to start with a large, rough working of your world and start going into the smaller, more minute level. I don't think this is done very often. I don't think people are like, what if there was this huge world that was just 16 continents and they started filling in from there? It's not something that happens very commonly, but it's the sort of thing that people imagine a general view of. You kind of know, well, this is a high fantasy world. I don't know what kind of story I want to tell there, but I know I want this. I know I want a bunch of forests and lakes and oceans. So you start there, and then you start to build a story around it, or you have some kind of hint of a story. I'm going to frequently reference my own world building projects during this because it's something that's a solid example that I've already been through, and I can show you the ups and the downs. I can show you maps and examples, and that way you have an idea of how this process works. The biggest of these series, like I said, I've already worked on for a couple of years now. It started as a very short dream. It was literally just 4 characters involved. I didn't really have any idea what it was about. Probably resulted from playing way too much World of Warcraft. And I really didn't think much about it at the time. Then all of a sudden I thought, well, what if this character was there because of this? So then that story spread out into this giant, that dream spread out into a giant story, and the scene in my dream is the opening scene for the book. And now it has about 4 books in the series, and it's still a work in progress. It'll eventually get up there. Now this is probably the most precautionary thing that I will discuss. It's something that we all do. It's something that can kill your novel. It's something that can make it great. There are people who just eat up lore. They want to know everything about it. And then there's other people who really could care less, and they put it down and they're not interested anymore. The worst thing you can do is info dump. And this is something that I did religiously. Everything I wrote, I was info dumping. These people don't understand the world that I'm writing, so I have to give them the information, right? I have to give them the entire backstory, so I'm just gonna do that all in one chapter. So I'd have these huge chapters of nothing but how the world was created and backstory, and it was really boring. When I went back to read it, I thought, nobody cares, or I don't need to talk about this now, we'll talk about it later. And that's the most important thing that you can do, because like I said, it gets boring and it's an information overload. People get confused, they forget later on, they don't have any idea what you're talking about, because to them this is all new. If you mention early in your series that the world was created, then you have to keep that consistent, and they might forget, especially if you throw out a whole bunch of names. If you're mentioning 3 and 4 gods at the beginning, about halfway through the book, they've already forgotten if those gods haven't been mentioned again, or if you mention them and they don't actually know who they are and you don't reiterate, they're going to be completely lost. So people get confused easily because in our minds we know this world. We know everything about it. We've lived and breathed this world forever. But the people who are listening to the story or reading the story, they don't. So we can't expect them to memorize every little detail just because we're obsessed with it. So how do you deal with info dumping? There are a couple of ways, and there's a couple of things you need to ask yourself. Is it necessary? Is it really necessary? Do people have to know how this mountain was formed? Do they really need to know every single detail right now? If you answered no, it's not necessary, then you don't need to have an entire chapter devoted to it. You want to drop little bits of information. You want to spread it out throughout the book, and that way people get a feel for it. They start to understand the world. They know where it came from, and they know where it's going. And they're learning the whole time. You're just giving them that little breadcrumb trail of little pieces that they can pick up and learn along the way. But I get it. This is super addicting, and a lot of people love lore. That's why games have lore books and things like that. So even if it's not necessary, but it's something you're very passionate about, make a separate book, call it a lore book, do little projects. Or you can mention it in passing. Have two characters that are just having a dialogue and have them mention it. Or if this is a really big project for you and you have your own website, have a little appendix on your website of, hey, you read the book and you want to know more about this specific town. Well, you can have a section on your website about that specific town. And a lot of you who aren't as into this might be thinking, who would want to read a lore book? A lot of people is the answer. And you're probably thinking, well, if I shouldn't include this in the story, why are you telling me to write it down in the first place? The first thing that happens is it gets out of your head. You don't obsess over wanting to write it. You're not going to constantly be thinking, I really want to include this. Because you've already gotten it out of your head. And you're thinking, oh, I don't want to write it again. And there's supporting documents. You might need that later. For my book, I needed to know about how long the world had existed, and I wanted to reference rulers that had led this country before, and I ended up making a list of all the rulers for 3 separate cities for the last 1,000 years. And that sounds insane, and it was insane, especially since I was throwing dates on it and comparing those dates to our world for a reference. It's absolute madness. But now, anytime I need to reference those people, I will know when they ruled. And I've actually run into situations where my characters were talking about, well, this king is the one who led them to this battle. And I thought, well, that's not right. That didn't take place in that order. That's chronologically inaccurate. So those sorts of lists really help. And it helps you break up monotony. If you have a very male-dominated society, and it would be incredibly rare for a woman to have a place of power, if you note that there's women in there, then you will see that that world's a little bit different. This country has had 4 queens, so they're doing a little bit better on the sexism issues, other than this place, who's only ever had kings. So that helps you break up monotony. It helps you give you supporting documents for later. Again, it's a point of reference. It helps you mark when events happened, especially if you're doing some detailed histories of your world. When you have lore, it makes the world real. And as a role player, you love immersion. That's what you want. If somebody comes in running through a tavern while you're trying to have a very serious conversation as a role player and they're screaming about cheese, it's very disruptive and it's hard not to pay attention to them. That's what the ignore button's for. So we want immersion. We want to know. A lot of people really need this extra lore. They want to know more and more. And if you need proof, this exists. If you have never picked it up, you might want to get a discount copy because you might fall asleep. But there's lots of other examples. If you look at the Elder Scrolls, one of my big things in Skyrim was I wanted to get all the lore books. I wanted to steal every single lore book I saw, and they were going to be mine. And when Hearthfire came out and I had all these houses, every single bookcase in every single house was completely full. There are certain players who like to make their own lore books, who will write them and post them somewhere on a forum. It is something that people have a passion about, and even if you're never going to need 4,000 words on fake flowers and plants, you've written them and you can reference them. And I mentioned these because the best time to do this is Camp NaNoWriMo, and it's coming up July 1st. So if you have a big project, then you want to get these out of your head, get these ideas on paper or books or anything, you should really do this. I did it for April. It was hands down the best decision I ever made because it just gets a lot off your chest. I did all 10,000 of my words and still had plenty more to write. I did a book on botany, which was really big and kind of absurd. I did books on trolls and ogres and ettins. I did a couple of different history books. I did a prayer book for paladins. These are the sort of things that are short and to the point, but have a lot of information that you can look at and get information from it later. I need a breath. Does anybody have any questions? I realize there's not much to be asking about for this time, because we aren't even in the craziness that is world building. The next session, the way we're going to work this workshop, is we're going to start big and work our way inward, because we don't necessarily have a story that we're working with. So the next one will be on world building, then on cityscaping, and then the last one is where all this lore book stuff comes back in. Tristan asked, what are your thoughts on collaborative world building with 3 or more people? I think I have mixed emotions about that, because you have people who have different viewpoints. If you're taking this from the Dungeon Master approach and you have a set universe and world that your story exists in, that is going to be a little bit easier. If you're making this world with other people, it can be a little bit difficult. The best way to think about it is to imagine your world being picked up, someone saying, I want to make a story, I want to make a TV show about your book series. At first you're thinking, wow, that's going to be great, and we're going to have CGI dragons, and we're going to have these water tubes for transportation, and it's going to be amazing. But as a director and a producer, these people aren't going to look at it the same way that you look at it. So you're going to be thinking, I really don't like what you're doing here. And once you give up this creative liberties and let them take over your baby, it's really hard to work with someone. So when you're working on it initially, it can be very difficult to share ideas with someone. If you show them what you've worked on so far, or if you've not worked on anything and you sit down and start with them, I think it could be great. I think if you all have the same goal in mind and you present ideas and you're open to accepting those ideas and sharing your ideas, it can be absolutely amazing. And it would be great if more people did that. Because one, that takes a little bit off of your shoulders. Because as I said earlier, this is really pretty stressful. And as someone who's gone through this over the last few years, I constantly will run ideas. I bounce a lot off my husband, and he just kind of gives me this dead stare when it happens. I get a lot of these looks like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Something about an Arab guy, something about a giant, and over time, it's grown on him. And I think on a couple of different projects, he's even given me some feedback. But it's the sort of thing that it's going to be your baby, and if you're going to work on it with somebody else, you all have to be a little bit accepting of each other's ideas and patient. And you just have to be willing to accept and move on. Hopefully that answers your question. Tristan just mentioned microscope, and Mal has mentioned that to me too. You guys are tag teaming me on this. I am intending on picking that up, but I literally forget it all the time. I've even mentioned it to my writing group. I swear I am going to get it eventually, and I'm going to look into it, and I'm totally going to share it with people. I feel like you're ganging up on me. But speaking of tools, you are so excellent for a segue. We're going to talk about how you're going to keep all this organized, because there's a lot of stuff that you have to do and a lot of stuff that you're going to be keeping notes on. I recommend, personally, and this is because maybe I'm a little old-fashioned, I want a physical and a digital copy of everything I do. I have a really big binder in my study that is filled with tab dividers. I have every single map I've ever drawn for my projects. I have every single note. I have printouts about medieval economics. I've got ridiculous little scribbles and sketches of plants. And once they're there, I can then scan them and upload them to a digital source. I know a lot of people don't have access to a scanner, but if you can, that's a great way to do it. Even if you're just taking a picture of a map with your phone and having that digital record somewhere, that's great, because if you leave some go right in the park one day, or if you're like me and do all your writing at work pretty much, it's a great way to have everything there at your fingertips, because there's flash drives, you've got Google Drive, and then there's all these different writing softwares that are universal files across the board, and Scrivener is the one we're going to be talking about next. Google Drive is great because you can have all of your files in a universal format. You can access it from pretty much any computer or iPad or even your phone. So you have everything there. I tend to use a flash drive. My whole life is on my flash drive. I back it up to my PC and my notebook every once in a while, so I have extra copies because I am paranoid about losing it. And I do have a file on Google Drive as well. Scrivener, though, is what we're going to talk about. I really love Scrivener. I cannot recommend it enough. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm going to switch screens just a second and go to Scrivener. We're going to see how this works. I have not streamed that often to know exactly what I'm doing. We might have to call in the IT cavalry. The IT cavalry is here. Yay, it worked. Probably should have tested this when we were doing all the other testing, right? So this is Scrivener, and this is the world that I've been working on. Scrivener is a writing program, but I don't actually write in it very often. I do write in it quite a bit for National Novel Writing Month, because it has great features where you can set your own word count goal daily or for the month, and it'll pop up and tell you, hey, you're halfway to your goal, keep going. And it does really great things like that. I usually use it though for organizing, because I have everything on a flash drive in folders, but it's easy to forget what you named a file, and it's easy to also kind of lose those files or put them in the wrong folder. Or if you've updated them, you may not have it where it belongs. So Scrivener is a really great tool for organizing everything in one place. My writing group actually just had a little workshop on this at our last meeting, and I learned so many new things about it, and you just keep learning. The great thing about Scrivener is that it is a huge program that you can use on a lot of different devices. There is an app that you can get for your phone or for your iPads, and it shares all the files. You do have to buy it for each device, but if I had an iPad and I downloaded the app for Scrivener, then I could access my files on my iPad or on my phone or on my computer. It's all across the board. And when I said that you should do Camp NaNoWriMo, this is why. If you win at National Novel Writing Month or the camps, which are not obviously physical camps, if you set a goal of at least 10,000 words and you meet that goal, then you are considered a winner. And you get all sorts of discounts, you get free ebooks, you get all these different advice emails and little certificates, but you get a 50% off coupon for Scrivener, and that's just awesome. It's not an expensive program to begin with. It's only $40 US, but $20 for a program that you can use on any of your PCs that can organize an entire book series several times over, or your Dungeons and Dragons campaign. It's absolutely wonderful. And you can see when we go up to a new project, there's a lot of different templates that you can use, and there are some on websites that you can download and import. If you're writing a book, you're most likely going to pick fiction, but you can also get your schoolwork done in here. There's script writing. It even has examples of, here's BBC radio screenplays, everything you could possibly need. It's an absolutely wonderful program, and I think there's even some National Novel Writing Month templates as well. But you can download ones and you can make your own and share them. So if you needed to organize all of your pen and paper campaigns, this is an excellent place to do it. You can take screen grabs of web pages. So say you're going to go somewhere that you don't have access to the internet, you can take an archived version of that web page and put it in here, and you can access that web page anytime, anywhere, because this doesn't require the internet. Before we go down the left side, one of the neat things that I learned at the workshop that I took, it has a built-in name generator. I normally use for names, I will go to behindthename.com and surname.behindthename.com. Those are really good, accurate websites that you can go to get names and their meanings and their history and related names. But this page also has, this web program has a name generator as well. So it can give you some names to choose from. You can pick what kind of origin you want. You can select your gender, and you'll have everything right there at your fingertips. And for some reason, it doesn't seem to be showing you the box for it. Because of course not. Yeah, I see that it's not coming across on the stream. I will have to put in a screenshot later or something because the IT Cavalry's here again. Very sorry. OBS is a very interesting program. Yay, everybody say thanks, Chris. Don't know what we would do without him. So here's the name generator that you all thought was probably imaginary. But you can choose gender if you want both. You can tell it to give you a lot of names if you already have a first name in mind. You can choose the origin for it. It's a pretty awesome program. And you can also go over here and search and see their meaning and everything. I use behind the name, but this is a pretty good system as well. So let's go back over here. So here's your layout. It has a lot of different ways that you can view it. You can add reading screens so that you have a bar on your left side or your right side, sorry, and you can see everything there. You can have it set up to have different books, and as you can see, there's a corkboard feature where you can show everything that you've done and have a quick snapshot of everything that you need to see. So I can see that my book has 2 parts, and I can see that I have revised drafts for these. That means I'm on the rewrite for it, and I've already got them working, and those are probably final drafts. But I'm sure I'll change them about 5 more times. So you can see how all of those work. And everything is laid out for you. And then, of course, we have characters. For my characters, a lot of people will actually go out and find actors' pictures. But I already have a visual image of who my characters are. So I just have mine broken down into these cute little pictures where I went to a website and had everybody, I have them divided up by when they show up. So if you're not going to see a character until the 2nd book, then I have it broken down into a book 2 character, so I know not to mention them before I need to. But if you have pictures of Tom Hiddleston or someone that you want to put in your book, then that's a great place to put them. And then, of course, places is the big one. And we're going to be talking about that much more later on when we go into the other sessions. The next one is going to be on the actual world itself. And as you can see, I have lots and lots of maps. And most of them are different sketches, and you'll see these maps later on. But you can see that there's quite a few of them, and you have all the little snapshots right there, or you can zoom in on one particular picture. Floor plans and cities, I can't recommend enough. If you're going to have a building that your characters are in a lot, you should definitely have floor plans. Because I got partway through a book and realized that my character's window is facing west, and I had the sunrise waking her up in the morning. I don't know if you know this, but that's not exactly how that works. So I had to completely rework the floor plan for that house, and I thought, wow, I'm an actual idiot, because that didn't work at all. And you do lose your characters, especially if your house is a little complicated. You don't know exactly where they are. That's why we have maps. That's why I encourage you to do cities and things like that, because you're going to need that information. If your character is walking down the street and they say they can see something, you need some kind of reference, because if they can see that from there, they're not going to be able to see it from somewhere else. My NaNoWriMo project from another year, which is still something I'm going to do, has a character who's blind. That has proved kind of difficult, because obviously I'm not blind and I don't know what it's like, but the world around them is completely different, especially if they're blind from birth versus if they're blind due to an accident, which is the case of this woman. And in this book, the town that she's growing up in, she knows everything about this town. She knows it inside and out because she's lived there her whole life. She knows exactly where her apartment is in relation to the general store and to the cafe and to restaurants. She knows this town like the back of her hand. That's why she can navigate it while she's blind, but she still can't get around. She can't see the sights that she used to. So I had to make very specific maps so that I knew what she was going through, how she would walk down the street, and how she would get to places. For that same project, I actually used a town in another state. I've not been there. I used Google Maps to give me an idea. It's not the town perfectly. It's a loose interpretation that I have put together. So Google Maps is a lifesaver. So we have our cities and our places, and then we have lore, which we have lovingly discussed already, and will discuss again. And I have a folder for each one, and you can see the type of work that goes into this. Am I telling you that you have to do all this? No, you are doing how much you think that you need to do. But a lot of these things are absolute pillars of a world. Culture and religion, your history, things that have happened in the past lead up to these modern times that you're writing in, and they're important. People are going to refer back to them. People are going to have memorials and holidays based on them. You need to know, if you're going to have magic in your world, how the magic system works, because maybe it's not all elemental. Maybe there's some holy magic. That stuff's pretty difficult to work on. So it's stuff that you organize like this that really helps. That way, if you decide to have a character get poisoned by a flower, you have a botanical guide to go by, and you can see all of your plants, what they do, where they come from. You're not going to have any doubt in your mind that you've got this. And that's what it all boils down to. Because these lore books are crazy, but they're also wonderful. These costume references are also helpful. Like I said, you can do screen grabs to get entire web pages in, but you can upload any pictures that you want. You can have all of your armor, what people can wear casually, and that way you have references to go by, because sometimes it's really important what a person wears. If they're royalty, they're obviously going to be dressing different than some merchant that's going through town. But maybe those people also have a type of formal attire. So describing the rich clothing can give a different level to your character, and it can also be incredibly boring. I can't tell you how many people have told me, especially a particular book was so detailed in the first chapter that they got bored and put it down. There's a difference between engaging someone and giving them a level of detail and boring them to death. Things like clothes in a world that's foreign to them, that's a little bit more important than exactly what color her hair is and what color everybody's eyes are. It's just kind of her that matters. So give yourself room where you need it. Give yourself some detail where you need it. So that's Scrivener. I can't recommend it enough. I recommend it to literally everybody who talks about writing, who talks about DMing, anybody who has files that they need to organize and put together. I always suggest Scrivener. It's a wonderful program, and I really feel like everybody who's doing stuff like this should have it. It's something that's going to help you throughout this process, because it's daunting, it's madness. You're going to have information that you never thought you would need, and this is where you're going to organize it. But keep that physical copy too. If you have a filing cabinet somewhere, or if you just want to get a binder and a whole bunch of really fancy tab dividers, you'll be organized and you will have everything at your fingertips. So that's the first session. We have 3 more if you can sit through it. But this was the boring part. This is just the general stuff. Because next time we're getting into world crafting, and I am really excited about it. It's still pretty general on the world crafting level, but we're going to look at maps. I'm going to recommend some programs and websites and show you the maps from my projects. If you have any questions, this is a good time to ask them. And if not, we'll call it a night, and I'll see you next Tuesday, June the 13th. And I will also be out of town Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So I didn't plan this very well. I'm gonna be coming back on Tuesday with the next workshop after traveling for 3 days. So I'm probably going to be a little bit out of it. Alright, I think that's it for now. Thank you everyone who came, and thank you to everybody who might watch this later. Again, I am always open to questions. I'll probably address way more questions in the next few workshops than I did tonight. I really hope that somebody got something out of this. Again, I can't recommend Scrivener enough, so if you can do Camp Nano on July 1st, it's really easy. If you have something to write about, you have the entire month to do at least 10,000 words. Set your goal low, you can always make it grow, and write. That's the most important part. Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you next time.